Senator Jehlen and I are delighted that you're able to join us for this Winchester Town Hall. And I hope you come armed with plenty of questions for us and lots of good ideas. That's really what this is about. We don't want to be doing all the talking at you. We'll both just say a few words just to kind of get everybody warmed up and get us started. But we're really excited to hear your feedback for us. And everything's fair game, so whatever's on your mind, please make sure you bring that up this evening. So I'll say a few words.
And then ask webcams if we need to use one of the mics.
Yeah, if you speak a little louder, I might be better.
Speak a little bit louder?
Yeah.
Okay. Is it okay, everyone? Okay. If you can't hear it all, then I'll use the mic, but I prefer to stand here.
Okay.
So just by way of getting started, I don't need to tell you that we're all living in very challenging times right now. And although we're starting to see, I think, some hopeful green shoots that maybe Massachusetts and our country is starting to come out of this very severe recession. As we all know, this has been the worst economic recession that our country, and in fact the world, has been in. Many economists will say since the Great Depression. So we know that has caused a lot of hardship for many families right here in our community. And Senator Jehlen and I in our offices get calls all the time from constituents who are struggling with their heat or their mortgage or their health insurance and many other issues. So we're very well aware of that. It's also been a very challenging environment for our local government here in the town and for our state government. Unlike the federal government, local and state governments have to run balanced budgets. They can't print money and they can't borrow money. And that means when you come to a recession, when tax revenues plummet, which is the case, you have to make a lot of very difficult decisions in order to navigate your way through. And just to give you a sense of just sort of the magnitude of the fiscal crisis that Massachusetts has been facing, and as you know, we're not unique. I'm sure you've been reading about what's happening in California and almost every other state through this recession. The year that we're in right now, when Senator Jehlen and I and our colleagues in the legislature were working on the state budget, we were facing a $5 billion deficit. $5 billion. To give you a sense of magnitude, the state budget is about $28 billion. And that pays for education, for health care, for roads, for our social service programs, for our debt service, and everything. So that was almost 20% of our budget was basically the gap we were facing between the expected tax revenues from sales tax, income taxes, other sources of income, and just being able to maintain the services that the state was providing at that time. So we had no choice. You have to deal with that. And we had to there were many painful spending cuts that were required, and really across the board. We've tried as hard as possible to preserve critical services like education, K through 12, like services for our seniors and our most vulnerable citizens, and health care, so we can retain our commitment to Massachusetts' first in the country universal health care. We've tried hard to do that, but it's impossible when you have facing a deficit of that magnitude. The state, the legislature, working with Governor Patrick, has tried to take a balanced approach to dealing with this crisis, and a very sound and responsible approach. And the state, even through this crisis, has managed to retain a top-notch bond rating from all of the bond rating agencies, which is a significant measure of the fiscal health and stability of the Commonwealth. And it's very important in our ability to be able to borrow money for investments in capital projects. So that's a good sign, but we have many challenging days still ahead of us as we hopefully slowly start to recover from the recession. We haven't been standing still. In the last year or so, we've taken some very important steps at the state level to address some of the problems that we had in our state government and in our economy. So for example, Very significant reforms of our ethics and lobbying laws were passed last year to try to ensure that the political process has high integrity and that we hold all of our public officials elected and appointed to the highest standards of ethical behavior. We also passed major reform, landmark reform of our public pension system, and I'm sure you all remember reading in the Globe and TV about some of these disgraceful abuses of the pension system. And the vast majority of public employees live on a very modest pension. They don't have Social Security in Massachusetts, and that's what they live on in retirement. But there have been previously some very disgraceful cases of people getting around the system and getting benefits that they should not have been. So that was very important legislation to restore the system's integrity and public trust. And then I would also point to the major restructuring of our transportation system. That was a system that for a long time has had multiple different agencies, were not well managed or coordinated, not very efficient. And that was a major initiative also last year, and it's still being implemented to better integrate and manage all of the transportation agencies that we have, and to save on the order of $250 million of taxpayer money. So there's a number of other areas that we've been very active. School anti-bullying is another significant initiative, and nutrition in our schools, but I won't go into the details of all of those unless, of course, there's something that interests you and we can talk more about it. I would also mention just some things. A lot of what Senator Jehlen and I work on are not big policy issues, the kinds of things that you read about in the paper or on the news or on radio. A lot of it is actually local issues, things that are important to us right here in Winchester. So, for example, I think everybody's well aware of the devastating flooding that we had in March and that our community has endured many times in the last 15 years. So that's a top priority for us, working with our Board of Selectmen and with state agencies and the federal government as well to bring to bear everything we can to mitigate that flooding. And we did receive approval from the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs, Ian Bowles, back in April, and that was an approval of Winchester's flood mitigation plan. And that was very significant because the town had been working on that plan for almost 10 years. It's a very complicated issue, flooding. We have to work with all of our downstream communities and various state agencies. There's local, state, and federal laws that come into play when you're dealing with flood and flood mitigation. So that was a very important milestone back in April, and now the town is able to move forward with a number of flood mitigation projects that will serve to mitigate the flooding in the years to come. Another area that we've been very active is with public transportation locally, and the Wedgmere commuter rail station, we were very pleased we were able to secure $2 million of federal stimulus money that is going to make that station fully accessible so that everybody, regardless of their disability, will be able to access it and use public transportation. And that project is underway, and we expect it to be completed before the end of the year. We also are working on the Winchester Center commuter rail station, which I'm sure you're aware is in a deplorable condition. It was built in the 1950s and has been starting to crumble. What's exciting about that is we've been working closely with the MBTA because they own that station, and they have now put $1 million toward coming up with a design and a plan for a rebuilt station, which is the first stage. But what's particularly exciting about that is we've been working closely with the Board of Selectmen in Winchester and with the Planning Board on coming up with a strategic plan and a vision for Winchester's town center. We have an absolutely wonderful town center, as everyone knows. It's a real jewel. It's one of the reasons families come to Winchester, along with our school system and our proximity to Boston. But there's a lot more we could do in our town center. There's new businesses and restaurants we could attract. We could have more mixed-use resident housing and retail, more affordable housing for seniors and for empty nesters who want to downsize, for young people just starting out, because we have the commuter rail right there to be able to go to Boston. So there's exciting thinking and early stage planning underway that we're all working on together to think about how to bring that kind of economic development to Winchester's downtown that's sustainable, that fits within the kind of community we want to have in terms of size and scale and neighborhoods and all of those good things. But that revitalization of the commuter rail station will be a centerpiece, I think, I hope, of that work as well. And then lastly, I'd mention we work, Senator Jehlen and I work very closely with our school committee and our school department. Through this recession, we've done everything we can to try to maintain as much as possible funding for our students for K through 12, and also to work to address the overcrowding problem that we have. Winchester is one of about a dozen communities in the entire state that has actually seen our enrollment growing significantly in the last 10 years. Most communities are flat, even declining. Winchester's gone from 2,800 students to now 4,200 in 10 years, which is just absolutely remarkable. 2,800 to 4,200. And so our elementary schools, even though a number of them are new, are bursting at the seams. You've probably seen we have portable classrooms at Morocco and Ambrose and others. And so it's critically important that we have a long-term plan to invest in a responsible, affordable way, in our school facilities, so we can have the capacity for those kids, and we don't have to have classrooms outside to educate them. So we have projects now underway for the Vincent Owens School, and just recently, very good news, for the high school, working with the Massachusetts School Building Authority, which is the state agency that works with communities on school building projects. And so those two projects are now underway, and we'll be working on them in the next several years. So those are some things we've been up to at the state level and the local level. For me, personally, the areas that I'm really focused on and will continue to work on, and the areas I often hear feedback from many people in the community, are really in four main areas. Economic development, local economic development opportunities, and that's what I was talking about before, particularly with the town center, but it's not limited only to the downtown. Second is healthcare. It's a huge challenge for all of us. Even with all the good work that Massachusetts has done in terms of ensuring access to healthcare, the problem we have now is affordability. It's a huge problem, I know, for many of our small businesses, for many families, many seniors. More and more of the costs are being shifted onto us in terms of co-pays and deductibles, and you're all well aware of this. So that's an area I spend a lot of time on. I serve on the healthcare committee in the legislature, so that's a top priority, is working to reform and restructure our healthcare system. It's basically the next phase of healthcare reform in Massachusetts, and it will be aimed squarely at high-quality healthcare that is more affordable. So that's a top priority. Third is education. I do spend a lot of time working on education policy, education funding issues. There's something called Chapter 70, which is our main source of funding at the state level, and something I'm very committed to working to reform Chapter 70 so that it provides adequate and equitable funding and predictable funding, so it doesn't go up and down when we fall on hard times. And then lastly, I would mention continued work on government reform. We've got to continue to make our government work for all of us. It has to run efficiently. It has to be, our officials have to be accountable, and it has to be as transparent as possible, so that we all know where our taxpayer dollars are going, what decisions are being made, so we can participate. That's what enables us to all be active citizens and participate in our community and in our government. So I'm happy with some of the progress we've made. We've got certainly a lot more work to do in all of these areas, and I look forward to continue to work on those together with you. So I'll stop there, and really appreciate that Senator Jehlen's been able to join us tonight. She has a much tougher job than I do. She has to cover lots more communities, and really appreciate her being able to join us as well. And then we'll open it up for your comments and questions.
Thanks, Jason. I really am happy to represent Winchester for several reasons. One is that it is great to have a partner like Jason who will keep me grounded and in touch if I ever stray in any way from the interests of your community. But community organizations and civic groups than any other community of its size that I can even think of. I think it's really wonderful, and the way it helps me do my job is that you tell me what you want. The first thing that happened when I got elected, we were about to do the budget, and people came to me with earmarks for Winter Pond and Upper Mystic Lake for the weed removal, for Sanborn House, and for the substance abuse program. And that was great, because that was something that I could make happen for Winchester. That is no longer possible, because, as you know, we no longer have any money, and we certainly don't have any more earmarks. But that was a good way for me to get to know what your community is interested in. Just this last year, I'm just going to mention some things that people have brought to us. Jason mentioned the Wedgmere accessibility, and Jean Batty, a person in the community, led a whole community effort that is making that happen. So I'm grateful to that. On the Green Line extension is something that affects all of my communities. It will never come to Winchester soon, ever, but the terminus does make a difference to Winchester, and so I'm grateful to the planning board for calling that to our attention. So we were able to get the Department of Transportation, after a great deal of effort, to come actually to meet with your planning board and try to make sure that they are aware of how the bus accessibility, bike, and pedestrian accessibility are important to Winchester, and how the final terminus is important to the whole district. So I'm grateful to them. One of the other first people I ever heard from in Winchester before I was elected was Marsha Wood, who explained to me about tax deferral and is a state leader in tax deferral for seniors, and got me to help me understand the importance of changing the requirements for qualifying for tax deferral, and gets me to nag all my other communities, because none of them comes anywhere near the number of people in Winchester who take advantage of tax deferral. So I'm grateful for that. And then, of course, I'm able to come here and talk about driving. When I was confronted with the issue of senior driving and safe driving for everybody, I had the biggest turnout here in Winchester and in the Gables to talk about what people saw as concerns, and I was really glad about that. I see Heidi DeLeo in the back, who is part of Stand for Children, and of course you have the most active group of people in the world to defend your school system and demand better funding for all children. And thanks to Stand for Children for being for all children. But particularly, I was educated by Stand for Children and the school committee on the unusual needs, as Jason pointed out, Winchester. And I claim no credit for the fact that we did change Chapter 70 in a way that is very beneficial to Winchester. In fact, you're the only community in my district, and among the few in the state, that is being cut less than 4% in Chapter 70 this year, because of the changes we adopted, three, 4 years ago. And finally, let me say I have actually gotten to hear quite a bit about flooding, not surprisingly, and my chief of staff, Bob Fitzpatrick, and I set up a meeting, and Jason was helping us, and many people from Winchester and the other communities up and down the Mystic were able to come together, and we learned a great deal. We didn't think there was anything left to learn about the needs for what we need to do to remediate flooding. I think everybody here is probably aware now that you can't fix it here, and the people are very frustrated up near the hospital expansion because they can't have their needs met until we address the downstream needs. We're not allowed to do that. And so one of our first goals would be the removal of the locks at the Craddock in Medford. And now we've learned in our meeting that Mayor McGlynn will strenuously object to removing the Craddock locks unless we fix the pumps at Amelia Earhart. So the solution to the Mystic is going to take a lot of coordination, and involve the Coast Guard, many agencies,
one thing I think would be helpful if everyone just could introduce themselves when they stand up, if you don't mind.
My name is Jehlen.
Great.
House Bill 1400 on shared parenting is up in the legislature right now, and I was wondering where you stand, and will you support it, will you advocate so that both people like after separation of divorce, both the fathers, the grandparents, the aunts and uncles on the father's side can get to have an equal right to see their kids too, and the grandkids and their aunts and uncles.
May I, before you answer?
Go ahead, John.
You
Just,
may talk
everyone,
about-
just introduce yourself, John.
Excuse me, my name is John Natale, and we do have a shared parenting meeting with Senator Jehlen and Representative Lewis after this meeting to discuss shared parenting. I'm just wanted you to know that. So, that's it.
That's great. Oh, you just coincidentally brought that up?
Yeah.
Oh, great. John's been a true champion on this issue, and remember we had breakfast at the Swan Street Diner soon after I was elected to talk about this and really help me understand the issue here, which relates to Massachusetts' current law when parents divorce and what happens to the custody of the children and the parental rights of the father and the mother, and thanks to your helping me provide education on that issue, I co-sponsored that legislation that you're referring to, and have been supporting it. So we can talk more about that. We arranged to have a little session actually after this town hall to talk about it in more depth.
Who could be against shared parenting?
I don't know.
Huh?
There are people against it, but I don't understand their opposition.
Let me just explain to you that I always label my bills a bill in favor of mother than an apple pie because I feel that's successful. Actually, it isn't. But we try to give bills a good name because that's what you intend. And then the question is, do other people have? I don't know enough about this, so I'm very, very eager to learn more about it. I will just warn you that there are hundreds of bills stuck in the Judiciary Committee. It's one of the committees that get the most bills and reports the least out. So it's a very frustrating committee to have a bill in, and I have some.
One of the, I'll just comment on that just in general, the learnings for me being new to a government elected office is one of the biggest challenges is just that there are so many pieces of legislation in any legislative session, and each session lasts for 2 years. There's about 5,000, I believe, at least 5,000 bills on everything under the sun, from shared parenting to healthcare to education to environmental bills to you name it. And so that's actually one of the biggest challenges is being able to prioritize one piece of legislation relative to others. And so that's where it really takes a lot of advocacy work from concerned citizens and advocacy groups and obviously legislators who care about that issue, just to be able to get enough attention on that particular issue so it moves along.
Cynthia Lava. This came in the mail today from the Center for Medicaid Services. I don't know, I assume everybody will get one eventually. But it says you can get help from your state through a Medicare savings program that can save you more than $1,100 a year. Now, I'm not interested in getting help from the state, but what I want to know is who is paying for this? How is it paid for? What is it costing the state? Is this another unfunded federal mandate?
I don't see it. I don't know. I haven't heard of it.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that to our attention. I don't think looks like it's from the federal government? From CMS is federal, that's the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services.
But it says you get help from the state.
Medicare costs. I appreciate, we'll definitely look into that and learn more about it. I'm sure we have a number of people in the room who are Medicare recipients, and so this certainly might be of interest.
Just to be clear, since this is from CMS and not from the state, I'm guessing it's something that the federal government is doing, but the state administers Medicare. So that's why they're saying help from your state. But if they're sending it to everybody in the country, it's not a Massachusetts thing.
No, but it's every state. It's
Right.
all.
believe me, we would know. Okay.
Right. The federal government pays for Medicare. The federal government shares the cost equally with each state. It's a little different in each state, but roughly equally for Medicaid, which is known as Mass Health in Massachusetts. But Medicare is a federal program. Right? Yes.
Just to add to the Medicare issue, I don't pretend to be an expert, but I do know that there are state plans which supplement Medicare. MedX, for one, is the one in Massachusetts, and there's also Paramax. Those are two names that I happen to know from my work professionally. It may be that that's what they made that you can apply through. You have your Medicare policy that covers that, and then there's an additional supplemental policy that gives you additional assistance to pay the rest of that bill. That may be where that's coming from. You know, those are different for each state.
Bruce, do you know anything? We are,
We're all stumped.
it just came today?
Yes.
Well,
Okay.
you're cutting it.
Very timely information. Thanks, Cynthia. Yeah. Christopher.
Thank you. Christopher Sprague. I'm a Winchester Town Meeting member. Thank you so much for coming to town. We so appreciate that. My question is really about the economy and the challenges of running the government and the certain paradox that as we have decreasing revenue, right, we have people coming every day looking for food stamps, unemployment, and all those other benefits. So the question is, how do you balance cutting budgets with, in fact, increased demand? I know the state of New York, it was their wise idea that they would cut all agencies to working 4 days a week, that was their way of controlling the budget. It never went through. So my question to you is, how do you deal with that paradox that never before have there been greater requests for entitlements, and yet at the same time you've got fewer resources to solve those problems?
It's really hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard. And some needs are not being met. If you talk to people who have kids who are developmentally disabled,
Yes.
they have lost services and they will lose more. If you talk to seniors, there are more than 3,000 people on the waiting list for home care. Every provider has been squeezed, probably harder than they should have been. We have to find savings, and I think, I will say one thing. We are not like the federal government. We can't write checks if we don't have money. So when, some people confuse when Jason said a $5 billion deficit means between what we spent last year and what we have this year. It doesn't mean that we can put it on the credit card. So we have cut significantly. We have also drawn down our rainy day fund, and we are very dependent on the money the federal government has printed and sent to us and put on the credit card. And right now, we're waiting to see if Congress extends the Medicaid enhanced benefits. If they don't do that, we're going to cut another $800 million in the next month.
Out of how large a number? 800 million?
28 billion.
Out of how much?
Out of 28 billion.
Oh, man, okay.
But there's lots of it that is not, can't be cut. You can't cut pensions, you can't cut debt service. When we cut local aid, we feel it right away, and you feel it right away. So there are a lot of things, and we can't, there's a lot of things
Right.
that are really entitlements.
Non-discretionary.
Non-discretionary, right?
Yeah,
That's
exactly, I
probably
understand.
about half or more of the budget of that $28 billion state budget is non-discretionary.
How much of the 28 billion is non-discretionary?
For example, on debt service, which you can't stop
Right.
paying the banks, but we are attempting in the Senate to restructure the debt and extend the period over which we have to pay it out, and that's very controversial. But it's part of trying to deal with a really untenable situation that you mentioned.
I would just echo that. There's no easy answers. I think what we try to do is what everyone's been doing. You try to prioritize.
Yeah.
The government we can't do everything at the same level we've been doing it. So you try to preserve the most critical social safety net services, the most vulnerable members of the population. Education's been a high priority. Trying to preserve as much as we can some of the senior programs. But really everything's taken a hit, and we have managed to soften this somewhat over the last couple of years because of both in Winchester and at the state because of savings. We do we have had saved money in good times, and we've been, which is the whole idea. You use it in a rainy day. It's certainly raining now. It's pouring. And the federal stimulus that was passed shortly after President Obama took over, that has been a lifesaver. And that most people think about that as being transportation projects. You're driving down the highway and you see funded by the ARA. That's actually a small part of the stimulus. By far the biggest part. I mean, $100 billion of that program was education funding. I think more than $100 billion was healthcare. Was basically directed to Medicaid. I talked about how the federal and the state government share that cost. The federal government basically increased their contribution. So that money has helped us tremendously. It's a double-edged sword. We should recognize that money is going to dry up, and so then we have to find a way to fill that gap. But we're hopeful that the economy is starting to recover as businesses start to rebound. Tax revenues will naturally increase, and that will help to offset that the federal stimulus money having been used up.
Thank you.
Just a follow-up to that question, actually. I actually have two questions. One is, does the government have any emergency powers to declare an emergency financial situation and give them the right to break municipal contracts, maybe reduce salaries across the board? I guess the answer is no, I didn't see that one. And the other,
But what he has, well, I mean, he sorry to interrupt you,
No,
but
go ahead.
I mean, he does, have to negotiate. There are collective bargaining legal agreements with employees and for unions, but in the government across the board has implemented furloughs. I mean, both of us have taken furloughs, like many people in the private sector. That's been true of public employees, and they have been. The governor has worked to renegotiate some of those contracts, basically concessions in exchange for having smaller layoffs. About 2,500 state employees have been laid off over the last 18 months. So that's
there's no ability to open up contracts for like pensions and wages that, like, we say, this is a hard economic time, instead of a professor getting 170, professors will get 150 or something like that. There's no way to open up those contracts.
You can attempt to open them up, and he has in some cases reopened contracts, and in some cases they've gotten give backs. I know Local 509 did a give back in
That, I can't, I don't have the facts at my fingertips. That sounds extraordinarily high to me.
I thought it was high
40% of
when
our
you told me.
prisoners would be
You told me personally.
fathers that haven't been paying child support. But I don't have the
I hate
numbers.
the term haven't been, I
think-
like the term haven't been able
Right.
to.
Right. I think it's a complicated issue. I don't think, it doesn't seem to me it's an issue you address as black or white, you know, that we have a moratorium or we don't. I mean, every case is different. I think we do have to hold people accountable for their care of their children. But I understand what you're saying. There are difficult circumstances, and I've talked to people who are in those situations. I think the bigger issue you're raising, which is a really good one, is our criminal justice system and our prisons. And this is just a devastating trend all across the country. You know, you probably hear the statistic, there's more adults incarcerated now in our country than are in our public education, higher education. And our population is far, far more per capita than just about anywhere else in the world. So we definitely have a big problem there. We've taken, just recently actually, a step at least in the right direction in terms of some of the reforms of our prison system, and that was, you may have read about this issue of CORI reform, which is the criminal offender record system that we have, and the Senate led the way on this late last year, and then the House took up this issue just a few weeks ago. And that was something that had been championed by the governor, by Governor Patrick, and by advocacy groups for a long time. But, you know, there was, some viewed it as controversial because it might be seen as being soft on crime, and politicians don't like to ever be perceived as soft on crime. I don't believe that's what this is about at all. I believe it's about being smart on crime, and so I think we've done the right thing in taking this up. But this will help to address the issue of getting people serving their sentences, getting back into society, being able to find a job, housing, and be productive, contributing members of society, and hopefully not repeat offenders. So that's certainly one way to manage that population. But there's a lot more things that we need to do.
I want to concur. I think 40% sounds awful high.
That's what he told me first.
Guy Glover's good. First of all, he doesn't know who's in the Department of Corrections. He knows who's in Worcester County Jail. But I think we have criminalized things that probably could be handled better in other ways. And let me say that one example is nonviolent personal destruction. That drug abuse is bad. It's really bad, and it destroys lives. But we used to provide detox beds. We closed hundreds of detox beds. We used to provide more treatment. And sheriffs and DOC tell me, those people are not, they have not disappeared. They are detoxing in our prisons and our jails, and they are getting what amounts to treatment at the most expensive facilities possible. We could do a lot better job if we treated those people as addicts rather than criminals. Now, making that happen, awful hard. But here's another crisis. Our prison system is 150% of capacity. They are double bunking murderers. This is crazy.
I don't mind them double bunking murders. I do mind them double bunking.
Well, that's one way to control the population, but it's not good for the guards. It's not good, and it's not good for the people who, I mean, first degree murderers aren't coming out. But the other people are coming out worse than the land. Cut education, cut training, cut job experience, so they're coming out straight from solitary confinement to the street, and they're not preaching. So we need to give them transition.
positive return on investment. Because if you're able to address some of these issues earlier, when they're less severe, ultimately, that's a cost benefit to society. And if you aren't able to address these areas just because we don't have the funds, then the problems grow. In some cases, they become worse. Those children who don't get early intervention need special education services in school, which costs more. The person who doesn't get mental health care ends up in prison. And unfortunately, that can lead to our economic
So
detriment.
Jason, can I ask a follow-up on that? In Massachusetts, there have been some really great moments of innovation. So we talked earlier about the virtual gateway. The virtual gateway is a way to structurally make it less expensive. So the concept of the virtual gateway is it's a portal where individuals can go. The idea is to move people from inline to online. That's the sort of, so that's part of the answer to my question. But my question then is, how or what sources are there for innovation in government to change the way government operates so that we can address these structural problems with innovation like that? Are there any pools of money for innovation for changing the way government works?
There's comment on this as well. There's lots of different opportunities. There's a very good initiative that I like that I don't know if this was put in place by the Patrick administration or this existed before, but it was a whole focus on performance management and developing for any particular area within government. What are your objectives? What are the metrics that you're going to use to determine how well you're working? How effectively are you achieving those goals and delivering whatever service it is you deliver? And what are ways that you could improve? You could do it differently and new ideas. So there definitely is a lot of thinking around that. I think there's a lot more we can do. One of the impacts of the recession is some of that just you have no choice. It forces people to do things less and find ways to make that work. So I think a lot of that is happening in pockets. I think you're absolutely right. It's something we're going to have to do more of and across all areas of government.
But there's no explicit funding for that.
There are different grants and programs and things. I mean, I'll give you an example. One of the things that the state government has been trying to encourage is more regionalization of services. Massachusetts is both what's wonderful about living here and it also sometimes you tear out your hair. Every one of our 351 cities and towns wants to have its own local government, its own town meeting, or its own city council, its own fire department, its own library, everything, right? And increasingly that's more and more difficult to do that, and there are legitimate questions about how many of those services need to be duplicated in every single community, how many of them can be shared. And we have some good models already. There's regional school districts, there's the EdCo collaborative, which Winchester is part of with Lexington and other communities for certain special needs students. We have other services that are shared. But rethinking that in the future, how do we do more of that? So there's actually a fund that was established with some money that is for the purpose of helping towns to explore these kinds of
Shared service
options.
options.
So that's one specific example.
Great.
Let's see who hasn't had a chance yet to.
Sorry.
Thank you, John Moore. Listen to what you're saying and just thinking back to cuts that have occurred and occurred and occurred and occurred. Certainly, we should be doing better in prisons and so on. But a lot of these actions that we're now trying to deal with are a consequence of cutbacks that have occurred over time. Now, in the past X years, government has lost this much money tied to their belt. You have
like to give back to people. And so we actually cut taxes more than we increase spending. So we are at a lower level relative to our income than we would be if we hadn't done it. At the same time, we didn't pay attention to the growing gap between what we need in terms of transportation infrastructure and what we have in revenue. So that gap has increased, not just the other beginning. So I do think, I think we will need more revenue, and that's not a real thing to say. We need to look at some of the tax cuts we've done and think if those are producing the results that we asked them to, that we expected from them. But at the same time, I do think there are other ways we can save money, and there will be a bill in the Senate pretty soon to restructure how we pay for healthcare for everybody.
What are the prospects of
Not this year,
pension
won't happen
reform?
this year. What?
What are the prospects for pension reform so that there is one pension system in the whole state, one healthcare system in the whole state versus,
Pension system for everybody or for all public employees?
well, we'll start with public employees and then we'll go to everybody.
That's very dim.
What about public employees?
Very dim. Because of what Jason said, people are very, very parochial about their pension boards. I think we could save money by putting people together. Unfortunately, for that argument, local pension boards have been outperforming the state the last 2 years, I think. So some are, so that those people like to have their own pension.
With all the changes in healthcare, what are the prospects of having a single healthcare system?
That's also
For
very
everyone.
unlikely. There are a lot of players that have very big vested interests.
All three. But that's still.
I would just add there, I think the single biggest, from a budget standpoint and the fiscal health of our local governments, our state governments, and certainly our federal government, the single biggest issue we have to deal with is healthcare. Massachusetts in 2006 really tackled the issue of access to care, the idea being that we want to get everybody into the system, almost everybody access to health insurance, getting the primary care they need, focusing on more health and wellness. The federal government, in terms of what was passed recently, largely focusing also on access. Some areas of trying to address cost, but largely trying to solve that access problem first. And so the three pillars here are access to care, the quality of care, and then the cost. And so we have to focus on the cost and the quality side of this. And there are some actually very interesting ideas in Massachusetts. A commission was set up, a Blue Ribbon panel a year ago called the Payment Reform Commission. They had representatives from government, academia, healthcare industry, and they studied the whole issue of the healthcare system, how doctors are paid, how hospitals are paid, and really looked at different alternatives. And they recommended moving away from a fee-for-service system, which is what we have today. Basically, doctors and hospitals are compensated for each service they provide, each procedure, each test, and obviously creates incentives for sometimes more care, not necessarily the best care, maybe unnecessary, to moving to a model where patients would have a home essentially, and all of that care would be coordinated with a primary care physician and then the other services that the patient needs, and more of a budget. Now that's a very difficult change to make. It requires the buy-in not just of the healthcare industry and payers, but also patients, because that's a different sort of mentality, and that's something we're going to struggle with. But I think that's critical, because if we can't get healthcare costs down from growing at 6%, 8%, 10% a year to something closer to inflation or below inflation, we will bankrupt ourselves.
Very close already.
Yep. Yep.
You may have already talked about this. I'm sorry I came a little late, but I'm going back to your comment about how every community in Massachusetts likes to think of itself as a sovereign independent unit, and thinking about watershed management, and particularly the flooding that some of us here have contended with for the last 14 years, I feel at this point as if we're being held hostage by Medford and various other communities whose decisions about their own water courses have an impact well beyond the city lines. What can you two do, what can the state do to help encourage local communities to work together, since in fact a watershed is a system that goes well beyond individual communities, and where decisions in one community, as in Medford, affect Winchester and their neighbors, even though politically these are independent units.
I think I'm in an awful good position because I do represent both Winchester and Medford and Somerville, because the Earhart goes across those two communities.
And part of Woburn, which is upstream from us,
Part
and
of
so
Woburn.
that's where some of that.
Maybe the Senate is the place this has to happen.
Well, that's why I'm lucky that I was able to call together, or we have the Mystic Caucus. Medford is actually, they have some ways to put up barriers to removing the craddock, but it's really a state decision about how to proceed with that. And so we will keep the pressure on there. But at the same time, we're trying to deal with Amelia Earhart and find out whether the mayor's objections are valid, and if so, what we can do to build a work pump at Amelia Earhart. So we are actually working on those things. But I think another thing people need to realize is it costs money. Removing the craddock blocks costs money. Repairing and replacing and adding a pump at Amelia Earhart costs money. All of the work you want to do costs money. And I think we should be grateful that, at least so far, the Patrick administration has not cut back on capital spending as much as they might have. And that is putting it on the credit card. But it is capital expenditures to save us money over time. So I don't think that's what's holding up this process.
So
But
you're
to be
saying it's
honest,
less.
I didn't know until last month that there was any objection to removal of the credit card.
So it's more financial than political, is what you're saying, in terms of what is slowing progress, shall we say?
I think it's, I wouldn't say that, I would say a lot of it's technical.
Uh-huh.
As you know, these flood mitigation, watershed management, there's been multiple studies that have been done of this in Winchester and the downstream communities, the upstream, and then there's been peer reviews of those studies, and now it shouldn't have taken 10 years. From when we
14,
started.
actually,
14.
since the first big flood in '96.
Since the first, well, Winchester really got started in 98, 99,
Yeah.
I guess, and so it's, that's when we really started to focus on a flood mitigation plan. So it certainly shouldn't take that long. But I think there are. I'm a layman here. I'm not a civil engineer, but just from talking a lot with our engineers and consultants that the town has used at the local level and at the state level, I mean, there are some very, very complicated issues here to manage and to model. And so a lot of that has involved doing that work, considering lots of different flood mitigation projects all the way upstream and downstream. What if you do this project here, you widen the channel, or you build another culvert under Skilling's Field, or you make some changes to Center Falls Dam. What does that do to the flooding in that area? What does it do to it upstream? What does it do to it down, maybe all the way up in Medford or Somerville? So I think working through that, there are political factors too. Each community wants to try to protect itself and make sure the situation doesn't get worse. I think it's been less in some ways of a funding issue so far, because we've been just working to get agreement on what the plan is and what we can all live with. And that was what we got approval in April from Secretary Bowles. That's the whole flood mitigation plan. Now we're getting to the stage where we're going to have to start coming up with the money. But Craddock is moving forward, which is and the state is leading that project, and that is moving forward. And the DCR, Department of Conservation and Recreation, is probably, as Adrian well aware, has been rebuilding the Mid Lakes Dam between the upper and lower Mystic. Yeah, you should have been. That's a great success, and Friends of the Upper Mystic have championed that, and other groups for a long time. That dam was 140 years old, right? And it really wasn't functioning as much of a dam anymore. So the reason, for example, that's important is when you have a well-functioning dam, we can take the level of the Upper Mystic down in advance of a major storm so that there's more ability to store water in the Upper Mystic and control less flooding. So all these are all part of the larger puzzle. That project is midway through. And then should give credit to Winchester town meeting. Those of you who are town meeting members or follow, the town meeting approved, I think it was $3.9 million, almost $4 million of local funding to undertake the next project in Winchester, which is going to widen the river between from Waterfield Road by the post office down past Ginfield, and that's a critical piece of this as well, because that channel is constricted there. As I understand, some of you lived in Winchester longer than I have. The river used to meander its way right across Manchester Field, and when middle school was built, we had a different mentality back then. We could just, harness nature and control it. So we were just going to pick up the river, and move it over to its new channel, and now we pay the price today for those decisions we made 50 years ago. Another area, we've talked a lot about flooding. Another area is water quality and stormwater runoff, and that's another area that we've made some progress. We don't get a failing grade anymore, but that's something we have to continue to work on.
Who stay in town, they're working on together.
John?
John Natale, I'd like to get your take on two issues, which in my opinion are really egregious examples of government waste, and they are police details and toll tickets. As for the police details, in my neighborhood last fall, directly across from the street, there's a short street which has 3 houses on it. They put in a new gas line. It took them 2 or 3 weeks. 3 houses, so on a busy day there's maybe 6, 7 cars on the street. Both ends of the street were blocked off with horses, but for those 2 or 3 weeks there was a police detail. $43 an hour. That's my money. The police say, well, Instar is paying for it. Well, who's paying Instar? It's town hall with my money. So it's an egregious and very visible waste that I see all the time. Although supposedly the administration of Governor Patrick approved flagging, it just hasn't happened.
That has always been a local responsibility on local roads.
But on the state highways, where you guys
Are you
have
live on a state highway?
pardon me?
You don't live on a state highway?
I don't live on a state highway, but I see state police on the state highway. This is the only state in the country which does not have flagmen. In Maine, in fact, the state of Maine, they rarely even have flagmen. There's a hole in the street. They have 2 lights on either side, red and green, with ping on like this, and it stops the traffic one way and permits it in the other. So for me, this is my money that's paying somebody needlessly $43 an hour incentive. And I'd like your take on what you think the government could do. Where do you stand on it? And the second issue, toll takers. Last year, the Globe reported that the average salary of a toll taker is $73,000 at straight time. Does not include, the perks, healthcare, pensions, etc. With overtime, they're close to $92,000 a year. And all they have to do is make change, and rarely do they have to make change. All of those, it is plain that all of those jobs patronage jobs. They know somebody who got the job. Why do we have tolls when in almost all of Europe there are no toll takers? There are tolls. You drive through some kind of a post, which optically reads something on your windshield and sends you a transponder every 3 or 4 months, and they're using our technology. So I would really love to see some action taken with respect to taking down the tolls, and substituting flagmen for police. Where do you both stand on those 2 issues, and what can we expect to be done about them?
Okay. tend to agree with you on the issue of details and flagmen. It is hard to argue when you have 49 other states that are able to do this. What I have, I think, a couple comments though. I think the governor did act on this issue and had been talked about for a long, long time before. It is on state roads. I think there are some, I'm not familiar with the exact details, but I think there are some parameters around the speed, on that road and some other conditions. So that's why I think they're not on all roads. And I think that's a legitimate question of why do we draw the line there, or can we go beyond that? One thing though that I have, and again, maybe this is not accurate, but I have seen that when we are using civilian flaggers, John, that the difference in what they're paid versus detail is not that great. Now, maybe that's not the case. Maybe it was in certain situations, but it seems that there are some savings, but maybe not as much as we would like to see. And the other aspect of this is sort of local use of details. I actually can't speak to whether what the state sort of role or authority is in that. In terms of just want to mention in terms of the toll takers. I use fast lane. I can't really imagine why people wouldn't want to use that. It's just so much more efficient for getting around, and it's anachronistic. I think we should be basically finding ways to phase it out, and we can use carrots and sticks, giving people incentives. Maybe the toll is a little bit lower if you're using electronic tolling, or you pay a little more, vice versa if it's not using that, and gradually phase it out. Maybe you still need a very minimal presence for people who are coming from out of state or something like that. But the last point I would make is that was one of the drivers behind the transportation reform and the abolishing the Turnpike Authority, was because there were concerns about how the Turnpike Authority's been run, this being one of many issues, and a need to install much better management and fiscal discipline on the Turnpike Authority and how we run all of our transportation systems.
One final point, which makes the police details so bizarre. Anybody can be a school crossing guard. We get paid $15 an hour, and there's a two and a half hour minimum per day. The police, $43 an hour, 4 hours an hour. Now, which person has the more responsible job? Someone who's watching a hole being dug in the street, or somebody saving my kid from being hit by an 18-wheeler, crossing the street. And one hand we have a $15 an hour person, the other thing is $43 an hour. It just doesn't make sense.
Thank you.
Last summer, during every second day on the news, there was reporting of seniors involved in car accidents. At the end of the summer, in 3 weeks, was passed legislation about the seniors being requested to take a test to 75. Why can't they do the same thing for texting and using the cell phone during driving, and this legislation can be passed in 3 weeks as much as we've done with the senior situation?
Well, actually, we did. I think both houses have passed a ban on texting.
On texting for up to 16 years old.
What?
Okay. No, texting for everybody?
In our
Yes.
house, at least, it was texting.
That's right.
And I voted for banning cell phone use without a.
But that's what it's texting. What about cell phones?
We did not.
I think, yes, I think they were, well, the first thing we should say is this is not law yet, and the legislative process, works sometimes very slowly, and that was supposed to be one methodically. You could use another adjective if you feel
sometimes
differently. Sometimes. So, as I'm sure you know, to become law, it has to pass. The bill has to pass in the House of Representatives, in the Senate. Typically, there are differences between them, and they have to get reconciled in a committee, a conference committee, and then it has to come back to each house to be voted on up or down, and then up to the governor. So where that legislation is right now is it's in the conference committee.
That is for
So,
texting.
and well, the goal is to be fairly comprehensive. So both of the bills do ban texting while driving. So everyone agreed on that, the Senate, the House. So there would no longer be allowed to text emails or instant messages while you're driving. The House version of the bill also bans cell phone use without some hands-free device. The Senate version may not have done that. I know Pat tried to support that, but you can't win every one.
So apparently it's not going to pass.
What?
So apparently it's not going to pass.
No. So again, the way it works is it's in the conference committee. Part of the reason that, and this went into the conference committee many months ago, part of the reason it hasn't come out yet is because they're trying to agree. So you've got a group of 3 senators and 3 representatives who now have the job of trying to iron out these differences. And it's their job to make a decision on whether, I think the texting will obviously be in the final bill. Everybody agrees on you shouldn't be texting while you're driving. But this issue of whether you could talk on the cell phone, whether you can do it or it has to be hands-free, that's one of the areas they disagree on, the 2 branches. And so that's something they're still, we're not part of those negotiations. They're having that. But there is also provisions in the bill in addition that would address some of the concerns about senior drivers.
But
And
why
that's all
they-
part of one package.
But why they are not using the same system that they used last summer for the city, having on the news constantly reporting accident due to texting or telephone usage?
There's no bill that's passed related to senior driving.
It's the same
It's
bill.
the same bill. It's one bill. It includes in it measures to try to address a number of issues, including texting while driving, including cell phone use, and also addressing some of the concerns about, seniors. Being able to drive. What's that?
It's a distracted driving.
Yes, that's probably a good way to describe it.
But it's also for disabled people, that people who are not good drivers can be reported by their doctors or by family members, and that there's a process by which they would have to show their good drivers. So it's not just distracted. I really want safe driving.
That's a better way to describe it, as a safe driving bill. So we're waiting right now for this bill to come out of this conference committee, and they have to reconcile those differences, and then at that point get it over to the governor. Now that needs to happen before the end of July because the clock runs out on the legislative session, and if we don't do that, then it has to start over next session. Right. Yep. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Christina Larson Kelly, and I'm here to see if you are familiar with a bill that is currently in the House on alimony reform, Bill 1785. Excuse me, it
bills that are in judiciary that have not been moved on and haven't been for quite a while. So I'm glad to learn more about it. I'm in principle in sympathy, but I know that there are, there must be, there must be real problems with why it hasn't come forward. But I think just because they haven't made it a priority.
I'm glad you brought that up as well. I mean, often they're different issues, but they often go hand in hand. There's custody and shared parenting, and then alimony reform. I think I've heard heartbreaking stories from people who come to see me at my office hours or whenever on both of these issues. There's no question our current system is not serving us well, and it's not necessarily a gender issue. Men are, maybe traditionally certain male roles, but this has changed. This has changed already. So this affects men and women, and it's there's basic issues of fairness and equity, and I think our system is just hasn't been updated essentially. And there seems to me models in other states where they do things differently, and I think arguably better than we do. So I agree. I think this is an area that just demands attention, and I think there's some, I don't know how controversial, there's some controversy around it, but I think the biggest challenge has really been just this becoming a priority. We talked about driving before, and it sort of, that became such a sort of from so many concerns around texting and other issues, becomes a high priority, and I think, that's not fair. We shouldn't really set public policy and set priorities that way, just because one issue maybe is, being talked about more loudly or more frequently in the media. But again, when you have so many 5,000 bills and so many different issues demanding and competing for attention, so I think that's really what we need here. We need a sort of a comprehensive reform of our.
I mean, you brought up a good point. With 5,000, well, the volume that is in front of everybody, and the woman brought up how quickly the senior driving rules of laws change. What does prompt something to go to the front burner, as she was talking about, and what you were referring to? What does move?
The senior move thing did not move fast. Senator Joyce has been trying to pass very restrictive rules for senior drivers for many, many years, and has been bringing it up constantly. And then suddenly there was, I don't know if there were more accidents, but there were more reported accidents.
Right.
So they started saying how old you were, and I found out how old seniors are. It's sort of senior drivers where anybody that had an accident was over 55. And some of those were related to their age and some of them were not. So I think media plays a big role in it.
It was just
There's very few issues that just suddenly hit the radar. They've been around, and people have been talking about it, and certain legislators who focus on that particular issue, I'm sure have been championing it for a long time. But then maybe it's the media, or like in the case of the anti-bullying legislation that we passed, that again, people had talked about that for a long time. This is a growing problem. It's a growing problem. It's not just on the school playground. It's online. It's on MySpace and Facebook, and these kids. This is destroying lives. Schools are not doing everything they should be doing. But then we had some high-profile cases where two very sad, tragic cases, and I think that galvanized publicly. But at the end, the bottom line is there's no substitute for citizen involvement and advocacy. And I think the more coming here tonight, sharing your story, as I said, John, invited me to have breakfast with him soon after I was elected to talk about shared parenting. The gentleman's here. We're going to be talking about this even more further after this meeting. If people are doing that with all of our colleagues and continually reminding them that this is something you have to deal with, you have to address our marriage laws. That's how it eventually gets done.
Okay.
So you're doing the right thing. I know it feels.
I just wanted to be sure that you all were aware of the bill that was
for it. I didn't used to be, but as Jason said,
Well, I have a two-page little thing that I printed off the web in case you want to.
believe me, I have more than that.
I bet you do. All right, then
I'm in contact with Second Wives Club, which are very, very educational.
Pardon?
Do you know the Second Wives Club?
Yes,
Well, they're very educational resource, I would say.
yes, yes. All right, well, thank you.
And I mind getting more, but
Very good, all right, thank you.
there are some real bad stories.
Terrible.
Yes.
Hi, my name is David Carnavale. My question is for Senator Jehlen. You were one of only 10 senators who voted against the illegal immigration reform bill. And I happened to be watching it live on TV. The reason you gave was because you were in favor of tuition for in-state illegal immigrants. So does that mean that you're in favor of illegal immigrants receiving these benefits as well?
The vote that I took was on a 22-page bill, which we had less than half an hour to study. So I have had a chance to study it since, and while I'm not a lawyer, I do know a fair amount more about it. And I think it would cost us hundreds of millions of dollars, and it would not catch anybody, or if it caught anybody, it was very, very few, because people are not getting the benefits that they think, people think they are. People think they're getting food stamps. Absolutely not true. They are required to prove citizenship or legal residence before they get food stamps. And the federal government monitors that. And there are many, many checks and balances. So I think that that was amendment was not what it was portrayed to be. It was in fact a big government solution to a problem that is not very big.
So the in-state tuition for
On
illegal
in-state
immigrants,
tuition,
that's
the
something you
bill that is
support?
before us, which is not moved, would say that if you had graduated from a Massachusetts high school and had spent at least 3 years there, if I get this right, then you could get in-state tuition. And I think that to say that these kids, many of whom are valedictorians and salutatorians, would be not able to go to college, denies us a resource for the future. So I think it's not a good plan. Most of these kids did not, swim across the Rio Grande by themselves when they were 2 or 3 years old. They were brought here not of their own volition. They have lived here. Their parents have paid taxes. You may think they don't pay taxes, but if they are living in houses, they're paying property taxes through their rent, and they're paying sales taxes. I can't comment on income taxes because I think those are different. They're different situations, but they have paid some taxes. But the main thing is that these kids are either going to be working at low-income jobs, or they're going to be contributing to our community. And if they are able to achieve at those levels, if they are outperforming kids who've been here all their lives and have many more opportunities, I think it's a mistake to turn down them.
And who's going to pay for the difference, the taxpayers?
In the
In-state
university
tuition.
presidents have told us that they have the resources to absorb this very small group of kids. It's not a big group of kids, less than 100 kids. And you're, I think it's like 40. It's under 100. That they have the resources to absorb them. And if you've gone to public higher education recently, you know that tuition is not the main thing you have to pay. It's the fees. So they would still be paying the fees. So I don't think that a big deterrent. Big places that have much, much bigger immigrant populations have done it. Like
Excuse me,
Texas.
let's give some other people a chance as well. But I think that by far the bigger issue here is that we have a broken immigration system. I don't think anybody disagrees with that. It does require action from our federal government. I think there was a proposal on the table that Senator McCain, before he ran for president, supported that would do a better job securing our borders, that would provide a work visa or work permit program, there's a model for that in many other countries. Some very sensible reforms that would help our country deal with this. Unfortunately, this issue is very politicized, and as we all know, nothing happened then, and the situation has continued to get worse. And that's what we're Arizona just did recently, obviously has brought this back front and center. I fundamentally disagree with what they've done. I think that's the wrong approach. And I think it's also been unfortunate how this has been portrayed in Massachusetts, because it's presented as either you're for undocumented or illegal immigrants getting public benefits, or you're against it. And that's not at all what this is about. None of us are saying that illegal or undocumented immigrants should be getting food stamps and health care and unemployment insurance and all of these services. Let me just finish, please. I've looked at all of these, many of these programs. They all have very rigorous criteria for who's eligible. And believe me, it's not easy, because I get calls from constituents, as does Pat, I'm sure, who are really struggling, have lost their job, maybe are facing a foreclosure, are eligible for a particular program, and how difficult it is for them to actually get that, how many hoops they have to jump through. You don't just walk in and say, okay, I'd like to now get benefit X or benefit Y. So all of these programs have those criteria. None of them, you have to be a citizen or a legal immigrant to qualify. And when I did my research on this, when this vote came up in the House of Representatives, I said, what other states? What we were voting on is whether to implement a federal database system called SAVE in order to try to implement this across every aspect of state government and do another system of checking. And I said, well, what's the evidence on this? What results have we seen? Only 2 states have done this, Georgia and Colorado. And in Colorado, they spent more than $2 million to implement this database, federal database system to try to check immigration status. And they could not point to one penny that they had saved, one immigrant that they caught.
Before the time is up.
And so to me, just let me finish my point, please.
Sure.
So me, when I looked at that and I said, our current system does not allow these folks to get public benefits as it shouldn't. We have mechanisms to check. I'm sure they're not perfect. People can slip through everything. But for the small number that may be slipping through, do we want to spend millions of dollars to implement some complex, administrative database system? And the only other states that I can see have done this have shown no return on investment. To me, that's not smart public policy.
I just wanted to ask you a question, because I know you guys are finishing up at 8 o'clock. So the health safety net, I'm sure you're both familiar with the health safety net, correct?
Can you just introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm a constituent in Medford of Senator Jehlen. Yeah. So again, as I was saying, the health safety net, which is formerly known as, I believe, free care, they used to refer to it, now it's called the health safety net. Do you know if they, in fact, verify one's citizenship status in order to be eligible to receive care under the health safety net?
You're correct, that hospitals cannot turn down
Right,
anyone.
right. Now, you both
who's in an
mentioned earlier
emergency
how
under federal law.
Pardon me, yes. Now, you both mentioned earlier how expensive healthcare can be, yet you're still claiming, Senator Jehlen, that it's not an additional burden to continue doing what we're doing and provide the service that we're providing as a minuscule portion of the Commonwealth population. But yet, and coupled with that argument, you're saying that by implementing these new methods to verify one's citizenship, that's going to cost an exorbitant amount of money, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, that it's going to cost sufficiently more money to verify through the various systems that were in the budget amendments that you did in fact vote against. And so, I mean, when just taking this one thing, you both have said that, oh, there's this great rigorous system in place to verify one's legal status here as someone who is eligible to receive benefits. Okay, now granted, yes, many of them do pay taxes, but that's not really the question at hand. The question is, are they following the laws? I'm sure you've both heard the argument time and time again, whether or not they're following it, whether or not it's a question of following the laws, or as Representative Lewis mentioned, whether or not it's a question of anti-immigrant sentiment, etc. So, I mean, if they're not verifying it in just this one benefit program, this one benefit, which is the health safety net, which of course you both mentioned, you both referenced the fact that healthcare is just so expensive. How
constituents trust what you're saying if what you just said contradicts, I mean, I just brought up one of many.
Well, let me go.
Please.
It's not one of many.
Sure.
That was not included in the amendment, and there's a reason for it. Because under federal law, any hospital that turns away someone
Thank
who's
you.
in an emergency situation will
No,
lose
but
all
not just in
federal
an
law.
emergency situation, to enroll in the health safety net where they can get birth control for free from the
Can
state.
you just,
Sure.
please,
I mean, really, I'm glad to have you and Mr. Carnevale here tonight. I understand why you're here, and I appreciate the chance to know what you're going to be talking about.
No, but I am also a constituent of yours, and this is something that I am deeply concerned about,
and
Senator.
you have every right to be here and raise your point, and it's a very important.
I think
Thank
the
you.
point
I will-
about
I will-
health
I will
safety
cede
net
the
is
floor.
that
Finish your answer.
Sure.
people are not eligible for any of the state programs regarding health care. They are not. And including many legal immigrants are not eligible for most of the state programs. For all of the things that were in the amendment, for example, unemployment insurance, there are layers of, including set the same program, which are used to verify people's status. So I think you need to, Medicaid, many layers, and I told you how much it costs when, and Medicaid does use federal verification. So, and since they didn't catch anybody,
My only question, I just want to hone in on this one benefit.
you want to talk
which is
about the safety net, and
the
I'll
health
find
safety-
out more about that.
Yeah, and I'm fairly certain that there is no verification method in place, and that the only thing they do by way of seeing if someone is eligible for benefits is to simply ask a question. Surely it's under the pains of penalty and perjury, whether or not they are a legal resident of the United States and of the Commonwealth, and obviously they can just simply write in yes without any form of verification. And so I just wanted to bring that up because, with all due respect to both you and the representative, I do appreciate what both of you do. I know it's extremely hard work. Well, I'm not trying to be combative by any means. It's just something that has been picking at my brain since I've been hearing both of you say that there are these really rigorous forms of verification in place. So I wanted to get both of you on the record as saying that because there is a camera here. And I'm sure that as I'm concerned, many of the rest of the constituents of the Commonwealth would also be interested in this topic. So I thank both of you for your response, and I would encourage you to delve further into the details of the health safety net
I
verification.
will certainly do that, but I will also point out to you that we are reducing our reliance on the health safety net because that was the intention of the healthcare reform. And so the money that used to go into that now goes into subsidizing people who have health insurance, for which no person without documents is eligible. And many legal residents are not eligible either and have reduced benefits. But it's a good point, and I will be glad to find out more about it. I don't know what other states do, for example.
I don't know, we'd have to look at that. If that is an example, and it's not something that we have no choice under federal law, and we can be acting as a state, and we can do that in a cost-effective way, that doesn't waste taxpayer money chasing a problem that doesn't exist, then we should do it. So we're in agreement there.
Hi,
Yes.
I'm Susan Verdicchio, I live in Winchester, and I just wanted to thank you too for, improving the communications between Winchester and the Mass School Buildings Authority of our high school, and also ask, I'm trying to follow the fate of the Chapter 70 adequacy study as it wends its way through the legislature. I wondered if you could help me out on that.
Sure. Well, thank you for those comments, Susan. And as we worked a lot together on school funding issues and on the enrollment problems in Winchester, and I mentioned this at the outset, it is critical that we have a long-term plan across the whole school system to address the enrollment growth and overcrowding. And we've got a plan at the elementary level where Vincent Owen is a critical piece of that, and then the high school is the next piece. So it's good news that we've gotten the notification from the Massachusetts School Building Authority recently that we can partner with them and move forward. In terms of the adequacy study, what Susan is referring to, and I made brief mention of this at the beginning, was the Chapter 70 is the main state funding mechanism for public education in the state. So communities budget whereby it's determined for each community what the cost is to educate the students in that particular community based on the population and special needs and teacher costs and everything else. And then the local community is required to contribute from its own local revenues up to there's an income and property value test to determine what the community's contribution should be, and then the state contributes the difference under this Chapter 70 formula. And as we have talked about many times, that formula was put in place in 1993. A lot has happened since then. That we didn't even have the internet barely in 1993, and all of the different ways of teaching and learning that we have today. We didn't have the kinds of health care expenses that we have today. Media and media literacy requirements, special needs, which has increased tremendously in these years, and that formula is outdated. So we've worked along with colleagues from a number of other communities that have been particularly impacted to urge a study, essentially what is known as an adequacy study, to look at what we need to do to reform that system of funding. We're very pleased that this did pass earlier this year, and the Department of Education has begun that study. And we're expecting the results. They have to get that back to the legislature by, I believe it's March of next year, which would be before we do the budget for fiscal year 11.
And so does the Senate have to take any action on it?
We passed an education bill in January, which was largely focused on addressing the achievement gap that we have in the state. And we, Pat and I and a number of others advocated that an adequacy study around Chapter 70, although not part of the original bill, should be part of that effort. And so we introduced it as an amendment to the bill, and it was passed in both the House and the Senate, and it was adopted. And then recently, during the budget debate in the House, we passed part of the budget to move the timetable for that up, because originally we wouldn't see the results until the end of fiscal year, until the end of 2011, and we were pushing to have that work done sooner by the Department of Education. So the House budget moves that up to March next year, because we wanted it to be before the budget process. We do the budget in the spring. I'm not sure what that'll end up in the final budget. So it's just a question of the time frame for doing that study.
So it's only the time frame that's...
So it's already passed, it's in law, the Department of Education has to embark on this. So the distinction here is just now a question of by when they have to complete it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So this party crew that stayed to the end, thank you.
Yes, you made it all the way to the end. Thank you very much for being here, for sharing your questions and feedback. We're going to stick around